If you were to drop me in this car blindfolded and have me drive it, I could tell you within the first kilometer that it's a Ford Ranger. It steers like a Ford Ranger, it goes like a Ford Ranger, it rides like a Ford Ranger, it even smells like a Ford Ranger. And it's this unmistakable identity, this Ranger-ness, that makes it such a big success. Even though this is technically an all-new Ford Ranger, Ford is still labeling this a T6 because it is an evolution of the old T6. Underneath the hood, you still have the same turbocharged 2-liter diesel as the old T6. It still produces 168 horsepower, 405 Newton meters of torque, still made it to a 6-speed automatic, unlike the 10-speed on the 4x4. And this combination gives this 4x2 Wildtrak a 0 to 100 kph time of about 10.6 seconds, which is pretty respectable given that this is such a heavy truck. And by heavy, I mean it feels like you're driving a solid ingot of American iron down the road. It's not the most nimble truck. The steering is light, it's precise. It turns in pretty quick, but it's got that cushioned feel, that damping that tells you that this is a serious work truck. And that extends to the new suspension. They've revised the suspension a bit, but it still retains that sure-footedness, but with a coating of syrup over it so that it rides pretty well. It's not the best in class. That still probably goes to the Nissan Navara, even though the new Navara is stiffer than before, but it's pretty good compared to everything else. In fact, the old Ranger was pretty good compared to everything else, and Ford very wisely decided not to mess too much with that formula. The formula in this case is Ford's utilitarian chic sort of design language. So you've got this big square interior with all these chunky shapes and like these cool grill-shaped aircon vents. I bet they're a nightmare to clean, but you know, that's what car washes are for. Aside from that, you've got this nice chunky steering wheel with all the buttons you could ever want. You've got the digital instrument displays, and you've got this gigantic 12-inch touchscreen in the middle. Portrait style. It's fantastic to look at, pretty difficult to look at if you're kind of short and you're looking down at it, but sit back, it's okay. So it's got a lot of space to show you all the different things that you need to see. And attaching your phone to this is actually pretty easy. You can now plug it in via USB-C to USB-C, and it is the best way to do Android Auto. It's snappy, it's responsive, and it's instant. As for sound, not completely a fan. Ford, you're killing it in terms of design, you're killing it in terms of interior space, but give us 8 speakers, man. Even the 4x4 gets a simple 6-speaker system. We know you can do better. You've done it before, you can do it again. Lack of speakers aside, the Ranger is loaded with convenience features. You have multiple glove boxes, you have a big center bin with a 12-volt socket, you have multiple USB charging ports, including the aforementioned USB-C charging port, a regular USB charging port, and wireless charging. Lots of places to put your phone, places enough for 3 or 4 smartphones. If you're like me, that's just barely enough, but for most people, you can get by. In terms of space, space is fantastic. I've got a lot of headroom up here, I've got a lot of legroom down here. Nothing is pinching my knees, nothing's even coming close to touching my knees. I've got places to rest my elbows, and I've got enough legroom in front to just lounge, and I can still cross my legs behind myself back there. Now there are some features that seem to be lacking. There are some blank switches here that tell you that higher paying customers will be getting more features than you, but it doesn't really come to mind. You're not aware of it as much, but this thing bugs me because this has some really weird door handles. The door latch handle is here in the armrest, but they still have a plastic blank where a regular door handle goes. In the middle of the night, when you're reaching for that door handle, you find nothing there. It's utterly bizarre. Ford have done a wonderful job of updating the Ranger without altering any of its key components. I mean, you cover up the front and rear, and look, that's a 2011 Ranger. But you pull away your hands and voila, it's a brand new car. but still visibly a Ford Ranger. It's got that squared off front end and the C-shaped headlights that only an American truck could pull off. The Japanese have tried the square thing and it doesn't quite work quite as well. Now there are a lot of nice touches on the outside of the Ranger that really drive home this utilitarian chic look that Ford is going for. Like this grille, there's almost no blanking plastic behind it. 90% of this grille is actual grille. And then you have the side steps and the rear side step. There's no other truck in this class at the moment that has that rear side step, and it's very useful. Now this tailgate might feel a little bit flimsy, a little bit tinny, but it's very light, very easy to put down, and it allows access to double charging ports. Most trucks have just 12 volt, but this has 12 and 220. A switch to an electric radiator fan makes things so much simpler under the hood of the Ranger. All of the hoses and belts are now easier to reach. Also, all of the electrical items, the alternator, the turbo solenoid, everything vulnerable to flood is being put up high out of the way of potential flood waters. This is easier to work on, more flood proof, and with the extra space, it's more heat resistant too. Now the Ranger may be built on the same bones as the old T6, but they revised the chassis heavily. It's slightly wider, it's slightly longer, and they put a lot more sound insulation in the cabin and underneath. This thing going down the road is super quiet. It's whisper quiet. No wind noise around the pillars over 100 kph. The engine down to a faint moan. And the only thing really are those Goodyear Territory tires. When you hit the wrong patch of road, the car is so quiet that those things come in like a brrrr. But as long as you're driving on asphalt, this is the quietest truck around. So the Ranger does have its quirks. It has a few minuses, but it has an overwhelming amount of positives to drown those out. And in this 4x2 Wildtrak form, this is the best Ranger you can get if you don't really need the 4x4 system or the extra power of the twin turbo. In fact, you're not really going to miss the extra power. This has performance enough to take it to most other pickup trucks. And it rides softly, it rides well, and it has almost all the toys you need. Now, I could quibble about the lack of forward collision warning and lane departure warning, but at the 1.5 million price point, I'll take it. We don't have a Raptor yet for this version of the Ranger, but when it comes, I expect some of the features that are lacking from this one to be on that. In the meantime, this is a very competitively priced truck that gives you a whole lot for your money. And besides, it's a Ranger. There's nothing else like it. This was once the class benchmark when it was launched 11 years ago. They gave it a new coat of paint, they gave it a new face, they updated everything, they made it much better, and it is the new class benchmark against which everything else will be measured going forward.